And so I gave him a blob, just in appreciation. I didn't know that he was going to use it immediately. I thought they had finished printing the book anyway. So I will start by reading to you, if you grant me the indulgence, in lieu of the review that Tony, was expecting to have at this panel. Just this, short blob comment, which is here. I say, this is an engaging literary reconstruction of a historical figure, Alimotu, mi do, Pelewura, not Pelewura, it's Pelewura. 1865 to 1951. She was a true historical figure. And so this is a reconstruction by Femi Olubile, steeped in historical awareness. Olubile's vivid imagination sees a wonderful woman in the mirror and makes her come alive on the page with all her integrity and grandeur. In the context of the political history of Lagos and the participation of other prominent Lagosians, he seamlessly traces her interesting life from her humble beginning in Isaleko, because she was a fishmonger in Ireko, through her many fears and impactful struggles against the unremitting oppression of the British rule of the Lagos colony, right down to her glorious end. She was the founder of the Lagos Market Women's Association with the solid and strategic support of Abat Macaulay. She was also a pioneer member of the Nigerian National Democratic Party, NNDP. She was a highly regarded Erelu Iyaloja of Lagos and an extraordinary mentor. Abiatu Morgan, whom you all know, who actually succeeded her. And she was a mentee among many other mentees. Although she did not have her own biological children, Olubile's defining portrait of this woman as a lover of other people's children is remarkable. She was a people's person, kind-hearted and generous, and all of this is profoundly moving and humanizing. When you just want to be good when you finish reading the book. So this book, which can be read as history or as fiction or as a faction, is by turns direct, passionate, thrilling, thoughtful, and lucid. I wrote that in the dead of the night. So my first question to Dr. Olubile, why did you decide to do a book like this kind of book on Pelewura? Not a history as such, but you just sort of make the best use of history to give this woman's life. Why did you do that?
Thank you very much.
What motivation, actually?
Good evening, everybody. I wish I could give you one concise answer to that. It came from my fascination with Pelewura came from several directions. One of those directions was my encounter over a period of time with her mentee, whom you described, okay, Alaja Abibatu Mogaji. Many people know her as the mother of somebody who's very important in Nigeria, and a major political figure, the president of the country. Actually, she was a very powerful person even before her son, the president, was known by anybody. So her fame and importance were not due to her association with her famous son. I think it's important to establish that anybody who knows history, long before anybody knew who the present president was, Abibatu Magaji could enter Dodan Barracks and speak with General Babangida. People who were around then and who knew things were happening knew that, in fact, it was the president's wife, and he goes with other people who occupied the position. I'm talking about the president then, that military president. Always addressed that differentially, almost as if she was her mother. She had an amount of respect and clout in society that was totally at variance with her education. She had very little form. I'm not aware that she went to school or that she could express herself in anything other than Yoruba language or Pidgin. When I had the opportunity to speak with her, and this was at a difficult time in my life when I was in of a teaching hospital, and got to meet with her and visited her at home, and tried to help to enhance the general medical support that she was having. I was very fascinated by how a person, a quote-unquote local, quote-unquote uneducated woman, could have garnered entirely on her own so much influence. So going back to Pelewura was a backward integration. In my mind, I began a quest to look, where did this come from? And the obvious answer was the wrong answer. It didn't come from her family. It came from her own history. And where did the issue of Iyaloja come from? By that time, everybody was familiar with the concept of Iyaloja. She called herself Iyaloja General, and she even called herself Iyaloja of Nigeria. And it was not a joke. It was something that people in authority, if not in a formal sense, but at least in a general sense, went along with as a way of acknowledging her importance. And then I happened upon Pelewura, and of course I knew about the market. There's a market that still goes by her name, and there are other things that are named after her. And once I coned in on that, then I understood where the Iyaloja concept came from. It's a totally unique thing. It came, there's no, at the time Pelewura started Lagos Market Women's Association, there was no parallel in Nigeria. There was probably no parallel anywhere in the world of the concept that she created. The creation of the Lagos Market Women's Association is not very precisely defined in history. Some people talk about 1923. I think but obviously, even by the turn of the century, even by 1903, when the first film show was held in Lagos, of course facilitated by nobody else but Herbert Macaulay. Pelewura was already, and she was a young person. She was a young illiterate market leader, but she was okay, she was a young fishmonger working at Edeko and who had expanded the trade that was bequeathed to her by her mom and had become quite wealthy as an individual. But the issue was not about her wealth, but how she had gathered and organized people around her. So even if it wasn't formal, even if her authority was not formalized by the turn of the century, I'm talking about by the turn of the 20th century, people were already beginning to acknowledge and defer to her authority within Oroko and even beyond it. So it was only logical in the course of the next few years that they started to organize weekly meetings. They started to voluntarily levy themselves so that they could have money. By and large, the market women were not formally literate. They were very similar to Pelewura herself. But they commanded a lot of authority within society, and they had great self-regard, so they didn't put themselves down. When the influence of Macaulay, and you get to see that in the book, must have had some kind of effect in helping to concretize Pelewura's ambition to centralize and concretize the organization of the market women, and to not just for herself aggrandizement, but because she felt that it was going to do a lot of good and give a lot of clout to women generally, but directly to to the market women. So the association sometime between 1903 and 1923, the association was formally inaugurated, and from then on, it has grown from strength to strength. So what I saw in personally experiencing Alaja Abiba Tumagaju was just a reflection across the decades of what Pelewura had started. Okay. But the story of Pelewura was endlessly and remains endlessly fascinating. Once she formed the association, her reach knew no bounds. And we're talking about, whether we're talking about economy, she fought, of course you know about the, it's a fact of history that by the time of the Second World War, there was food shortage and the government tried to control not just the prices of local food products like gari, but even the supply of those products. And Pelewura rose to her highest stature in the battle that she did. Those things, these are facts of history, incidentally. The government's effort to control food, both the supply of food and the price of food in Lagos, was under something that was called the pooling regulations. Pooling was actually a retired major in the army who was given the authority by the colonial masters to superintend over food, all the markets and all the food affairs of the nation, because it was a crucial thing. Of course, people needed to eat to survive, and there was a general shortage of food all over the world because the Western world was at war. She fought her most famous battles against the government because of the pooling wars, and she won in the end. The important thing is that she won all of the battles that she fought, all of them.
Can you take us through some other battles that she fought?
Let's talk about the taxation of women. Okay. The issue occurred in two cycles. With one government, she got agreement after a battle. When she got wind that there was about to, I think this was shortly after the First World War, that government was tightening its belt and felt that a good source of revenue would be some minimal taxation on the female folk. But that was in the early years of the Lagos Market Women's Association. So she rose to the battle, and everybody gathered around. And it wasn't just the women, but even the men. Because the argument that the women were advancing was that things were very difficult. For many of them, their men were in living in very difficult circumstances. And as many people who grew up in this environment will know, it is not unusual at all for the woman who does a petty trade or who does whatever to be the main breadwinner of the family. And it wasn't a breadwinner in the sense of, in your face sense of the modern day. It was breadwinner in a way that preserved the dignity and authority of the men. You were talking about Pelewura embodying a brand of homegrown feminism that actually I think our people are not, that automatically brings the reason. Why do I think this is a tellable or readable story? It is because people need to take this and own it and know that we didn't learn feminism, in quotes, from the Western world, and there is no imported feminism that holds a candle to the homegrown femininity of people like Abibatu Magaji or her antecedents, especially Pelewura. You know, it comes down to Pelewura. So the logic of the first battle against, and I think this was precisely in 1923 actually, the logic of the first fight against that taxation of women, which Pelewura championed, was that since many of them were silent and not advertised breadwinners of their families, if they were taxed, then their families will be destitute. Their families will suffer. So they got they went on the streets. By that time, the influence of the Market Women Association had spread beyond Ereko to all of the major markets, and there were 16 of them at that time. All of the major markets in Lagos. So she had become a very powerful figure. In fact, the very fact of that power was very intimidating for the government. There's a Nigerian, okay, let me finish, I'll finish with that so that I can tell you how people reacted to it. So she fought that battle and she got assurance. When the women took to the streets and government saw how powerful they were, they got an assurance that in perpetuity, the women of Lagos would never be taxed, whatever happened. Of course, the matter then came up again much later with another government, and this time it was Bodilon, the famous Bernard Bodilon, who was in government. That's the relationship of Pelewura with Bodilon is another matter, is another story entirely. She's a very easy to write about person in the end, because you can take the historical points, and when you try to build flesh around them, it's a fantastic exercise. This was somebody who would walk into government house or would be invited. There was a time she went to protest. She led the protest, and the women were standing outside, and okay, the security men, the fuller, again you can take it. The soldiers were called fuller soldiers. You can take from the epistome, you can derive wisdom about who constituted that force from that description. Okay, and they stood there, they were keeping, the women were singing and shouting. They said, okay, Bodilon, the governor of Nigeria, by that time it was Nigeria, it wasn't just Lagos, sent word that, okay, Pelewura could come with one or two of her people, but that the other people had to wait on the street. When Pelewura got inside government house, Bodilon rose to greet her, and he was full of apologies, and his apology was not over the issue that she came for. It was because Mrs. Bodilon was not around to offer Pelewura tea. So there's a famous recorded statement in history that says, "Kini mo fẹ́ fi tea ṣe?" But it also shows that that was not the first occasion that she was visiting government house, and that she was on friendly terms with Mrs. Bodilon anyway. Otherwise, it would be a pointless comment. So there's a story around that. Even if it's not in the history book, it was very convenient to build a story. And it's a very plausible story. Okay, so eventually, Bodilon was somebody who got along very well with the people of Lagos. He got,
how did she, very quickly, how did she relate to Mrs. Bodilon since she couldn't speak English? What did they talk about?
What do two women of about the same age, coming from different cultures, talk about? Your guess is as good as mine. She was, Mrs. Bodilon was an alien in Lagos. Okay. Pelewura was the quintessential Lagosian. Not just the quintessential female Lagosian, but the quintessential. She was a fashion icon, incidentally. So she wasn't, the part of the feminism that she represented was not the bra burning or androgynous type of power, portrayal. She was very, very woman, if you like. And but she was also made of steel, and it was everybody who came within her penumbra recognized that this is somebody. It's not just that this person is not a pushover. This is a person who's going to roll you over. If you stand in a way. That was I want to finish this with of course, a person who stood with Pelewura was Abat Macaulay. Okay, and they synergized, and part of that synergy, part of the expression of that synergy was the crystallization of what became the first national effort at political expression in Nigeria. Okay. She had been a founding member of Abat Macaulay's party, which was a Lagos party. But when Abat Macaulay's vision expanded, and he got in contact with more people, then he got around him some other people, including Nnamdi Azikiwe, whom we talked about, and they formed NCNC. Pelewura was a founding member. In fact, when they were going to do a national tour to sell their vision after I think it was the Richardson Constitution. Okay, it was Pelewura that hosted the first. There were no states then. The first stop in that national tour was done in Lagos, and it was hosted by Pelewura. There's an expression there's a statement that I attribute to Nnamdi Azikiwe in the upshot of that. Immediately following the hosting of that convention, and he said, "Iyaloja, you have done wonderfully well hosting us in Lagos, but there are no Iyalojas in the other places that we are going to, that are planning to go, since we are going all around Nigeria. How are we going to cope?" And it was meant to be like the ultimate compliment to her. So this is the person this book is about. But in chasing Pelewura, I also discovered Abat Macaulay, and I discovered how the story of Lagos society evolved and crystallized in its most important formative era. I discovered the story of Eshugba Yeleko and how how the spirit of Lagos expressed itself in two major confrontations with the government of the day. And those two major confrontations, the people of Lagos won against their government. The first one was, and this government,
right up to the Privy Council.
Yes, these two governments were the governments of Nigeria. These were the nascent days, the early days of Nigeria. It was after 1914. Okay, so the first battle was when the government wanted to give itself the authority to take land, to appropriate land from anywhere in Lagos, and used the authority of the state that they wanted to use the land for the good of the people, whatever that meant. Lagos people that now rallied around one illiterate, I keep going back to this illiterate thing, one illiterate Idejo chief called Amadu Tijani, who owned, the Idejos are the ones who own Lagos. They own they own the land. They are, so many of them are now Obas, okay? But this person, Amadu Tijani, was an illiterate Idejo chief who owned the Apapa, Ijora Apapa area. And the government said it wanted to take the land. So they took the government. When I say they, it wasn't just the man, but it was Herbert Macaulay and people of Lagos, and of course market women, they contributed money. They fought the government in the courts in Lagos. They lost. They took the case to the Privy Council in London. Now, again, that is how this begins to show how, of course, the people like Pelewura contributed money. They had not just the best of the local lawyers. They hired English lawyers, the best at the bar. So they took the government to them. Not only did they win, but a famous incident arose in the course of their prosecuting that battle. Herbert Macaulay, while in the UK, he carried the staff of authority of Eshugbaye Eleko around, okay, and he even went to a dinner, a garden party with the King of England, at least in the grounds of Buckingham Palace, okay. And this was very offensive to the Nigerian government of the day. They felt that the Oba was subtly undermining the authority. But that was not the end of it. Herbert Macaulay gave an interview to the Daily Telegraph of London, in which during the interview, he castigated the government of Nigeria, and he said the Oba of Lagos was being undermined in his authority, and he said very unpleasant things. And just to be sure that the government saw the record of the interview, he sent a copy of the Daily Telegraph to government, to Lagos House. So, of course, government was struggling. Not only did they lose the battle about the land, and the land reverted, of course, the land then reverted to the people, but Macaulay had undermined government's authority previously. There was a twist again. At that time, there was a Nigerian who had risen to the highest, a Lagosian. It had to be a Lagosian, who had risen to the highest level in the civil service that any black man, any indigenous had ever risen to. He became, that was actually our first head of service in Nigeria, Herika. Okay. He was the very opposite of Herbert Macaulay. He was not people friend. He was very brilliant. He was very Lagos oriented. He was very, in fact, he was very strong. He did a lot of good for Lagos, but he despised the idea that illiterate market women could have any voice in public affairs. And he derided Herbert Macaulay, who was originally his friend. He called him a criminal. Herbert Macaulay by that time had gone to prison twice. That's another story, but it's in the book. And so they were like two different sides of Lagos. Herika was very full of himself. He was very anglified. He always dressed correctly, very sharply. He spoke perfect English. He did all the things that people. Macaulay, of course, could do all of things. He had superior upbringing. His father was the principal of the first principal of CMS Grammar School. His family, Bishop Ajayi, that the first bishop was actually in his family. So he had antecedents, but he repudiated some of those antecedents and decided to be a grassroots person. So Pelewura was in between these two people, and he navigated the terrain. The immediate aftermath of the landmark judgment in the Privy Council was devastating to government. Herika, speaking for the government, asked the King of Lagos to castigate Herbert Macaulay for insulting the government. He asked him to ask a town crier to go around Lagos saying that this man was useless, he was stupid, he didn't give him authority to carry his staff of office anywhere, he wasn't speaking for him. Of course, the king refused to do that. So for that, he was ostracized for 5 years. He was, he wasn't exactly dethroned, but he was ostracized and everything. But much worse was going to come later. Eventually, he was dethroned and sent into exile for all of that time. People like Pelewura, in alliance with Herbert Macaulay, held the fort, and they kept the spirit of Lagosians going. They were not going to relent, they were not going to back out. Eventually, Eleko Eshugbaye was reinstated after another battle that went all the way to the Privy Council. Now, this is where we are coming. When you look at these titanic issues, in the center of which every time there was this illiterate market woman, you get to think that there's something unique, not just about Pelewura, but about what you can call the spirit of Lagos. I think some of that may have been lost in the course of time, and perhaps people may not even have the inheritors of that spirit, may not even be aware that it ever existed. And one of the real reasons why I decided I had to do Pelewura, I had to chase Pelewura, and in chasing her down, as I said, I got a bigger story. I felt I needed to connect people with their past. So although it is faction, it is true. In fact, it is more real because the key figures, the key signposts of it are embedded in history. There was a Herbert Macaulay, there was a Henry Carr. They represented what they represented. They both helped Lagos in their different ways. I mean, Henry Carr was the first chancellor of the CMS mission at the cathedral of the Lagos diocese, and he was very helpful to female education all over Lagos. Okay, so Pelewura connected me with all of that, and I just decided to bring the story. So the story, after a certain point, wrote itself. I did a series in my column. I run a weekly column, and when I was chasing the story, I did a series called Dateline Lagos, and the time belt of the Dateline was mostly during the lifetime of Pelewura. That was the time belt when the Spanish flu came and devastated Lagos, because some people corruptly allowed some afflicted people, instead of following regulation and keeping ships in quarantine, they allowed the few people who had come from, I think somewhere off the Liberian coast, they allowed them to sneak in, and they were incubating the flu. And so not only did a lot of Lagosians die, but they had the train. Lagos had the train and everything. So they went into the hinterland, and it is recorded that almost 500,000 Nigerians, in quotes, died as this. But Lagos, of course, was very badly afflicted. There was a story. The story was that every morning when you went around, you see fresh corpses wrapped in white cloth laid out on the doorstep, and there was a corps of people who were recruited to be carrying them. And there's a song about the whatever. You know, Lagosians make songs about everything. So, but the import of that song is that they have been given a high amount of money. People were recruited because they were trying to get this gang. They wore yellow. They were trying to get people to come so that they would be there to carry the corpses away. But of course, because they themselves caught the flu very easily because they died very quickly. So they said something like that, implying that your life was being traded off for the money. But of course, somebody had to do that. So that was a period in Lagos. The endless fascination with things that happened during the lifetime of Pelewura was occasioned by not just the fact that it was about her life, but about the lives of a whole lot of others, including the city, well, not the city, the evolving city of Lagos and its people. She embodied not just the women folk, but a potential that is yet to be recreated and fully actualized. But if it was there then, the point is that it can always be there again. That So the connection between Pelewura and Abibatu Magaji, to whom incidentally the book is dedicated, is really the connection between the different generations. The sense that there's a thread between what was there before and what may be here now, but is not being expressed, meaning that it can still be expressed. So it's a hopeful story. It's not meant to be didactic in any way. It's a story that also that tells itself. In the end, the end of the story involves one of her most vocal supporters who did not like the idea of anybody in her family marrying outside Yoruba culture, incidentally. And then the son, who was sent to the UK by to study medicine by Pelewura, comes back and he has married a lady from Onitsha, who is a nurse. Yeah. And in a way, that the inevitability of that trajectory against all the barriers that were there but that were gradually being removed as time went on. For me, it's a hopeful story, not just about Lagos, but about the possibility and the inevitability of it, not just of a greater Lagos, but of a greater Nigeria.
There are other detours, in the book, like the role that Dr. Randu plays in her life. Samuel Johnson's story.
So many stories.
Yes. So many stories. And the fact that...
Let me take the Samuel Johnson story. Okay. All of us have either read or seen or heard about the story, the history of the Yoruba. The person who published it, who wrote it, did not live to see it published. The manuscript that was published was not even what he wrote, because it got lost. Not just once, but twice. So it had to be recreated afresh by his younger brother, who was not a writer, and just pieced things together in memory of his brother, and he pulled his. So that was not the original book, but it's a labor of love, not just to a people, but also to a family, to a particular idea of getting. So there are just many, but again, those stories are not my creation. Those stories are true stories. I just needed to put maybe he was wearing a red shirt or whatever it was, or it was this discussion took place in the afternoon or instead of in the night, whatever. So the Dateline series, which pegged different activities happening at different times, helped me to get a sense of flow about the things that were the ebb and flow of history and activities. 90% of them actual things that took, and I just then needed to flesh it out.
Very quickly, Randu. We are being asked to Randu, the doctor.
Well, it was at the book. I had a book launch for Pelewura 2 days ago, and Chief J.K. Randu, who is a direct descendant, I think he's the grandson of the original doctor. J.K. Randu was a very wealthy physician. The way you tell at the turn of the century who was wealthy was that they lived on the marina. If you lived in marine, the best in quotes people, that is the wealthiest people, the colonial authorities and others that lived in that, they were the ones that could afford to live in that zone. The rest of the people lived in Isaleko and Lowobo and other places. So Randu had a house there. He was a physician. He eventually worked for a time for government, but eventually he set up his own practice. He was well to do, but he had a few, if you like, cases. He could afford a car, but he rode a bicycle all about. But he was not your simple, easygoing man. Don't mistake that. All the food that he ate was imported from England. So there are contradictions there, but he was very good, and he was friends with Pelewura. Again, you wonder, how did they communicate? But he was not. Part of the story of Randu is that sitting on the upper level of his house in Marina, he could see the boats that took us on a daily basis from the Marina across water to Apapa to do their trade, and then they came back in the evening. Every so often he will hear a loud cry as one of the boats capsized. So regular event, because Lagos people or those surrounded by water have never had the seafaring tradition, and they've never been great swimmers. So he was appalled at the frequent loss of life, especially among the market women who took those rickety boats across the isthmus. What he did then was he started a swimming pool, and he felt that if people learned to swim, then they would not be, even if the boat capsized, they would not. Of course, so that's the story of the J.K. Randu swimming pool that all of us know. It was a function of course, the market women never learned to swim. but I mean, it became a social gathering point for young people to come and hang out, and other things developed around it. But that's how it came. That's how the concept came about. So that's the story of Randu.
Thank you very much. Very finally, I noticed in the book that even though Herbert Macaulay is called by his name here, Ejongboro, I mean, when you are called Ejongboro, you are not just an Ejongboro. In the case of Macaulay, we know from other sources that, a fine man, not too averse to being prolific, he loved women, and they sired many children for him. But smartly, I noticed that you sort of feel shy of playing up that story, of his prolixity, and it's like, I mean, let me treat him with reference and all that.
No,
why did you do that?
I was just being faithful to recorded history and not dwelling on innuendo. Incidentally, one of my special guests at the book launch of Pelewura 2 days ago was Admiral Macaulay, who is a direct descendant of Macaulay. The story of Macaulay is actually that his real wife, his only wife, died in the childbirth of their first son. And that occurred within like 2 years of their marriage. And Macaulay vowed that he would never get married again. And he kept faithful to his word, okay? But he didn't vow that he would never have children again. How he was a very full-bodied Lagosian. But everything that people say about him is in an innuendo. There's no proof. Of course, there's evidence. He had a lot of children. So they must have had mothers, but there was nobody living.
You calling that innuendo? You are a writer. You are a writer.
No, this is not about sleaze. This is just about facts.
This is not history now.
This
is fiction. Fiction. Why wouldn't you sort of, that juicy part, let us see it, let it come alive.
When Macaulay first of all started, when they first became friendly, in the office that she created at Ereko, people, of course, tongues started wagging, and so Pelewura had to tell her, no, he's my friend and he's my brother.
With his handkerchief. I remember your description.
The many children of Macaulay and the fact that many of them turned out well is testimony to the strength and responsibility of the women folk in Lagos, and it's still an ongoing. And we need to see that in a positive way, not in the sleazy way that he did all of these things, which are fact, but in the sense that he was never tainted openly with scandal. Nobody ever came, to the best of it, it's not recorded anywhere that anybody ever came to shout at his doorstep. He was a very stylish man who lived. His house was behind, behind the present general post office. Okay, that's Babina, and they called it Casting Hall. And people trooped there, whether the Lagos people trooped there, the European merchants trooped there, government people, government officials trooped there to associate with him, to enjoy his company. He never lost that.
Doctor, let me. Mark, don't try me. And we will do it now. We will do.
German,
let's clarify. This is yes. So Dr. Patrick Deleko was here roughly 7-8 years ago, and you know about his book, the Elites of Modern Lagos, and the way he spoke about Macaulay was a little bit derogatory. He said, he described him as, if you're looking at for the very first person to be described as a Nigerian politician, that was about Macaulay. And he set up this same thing that you said of this parallel between Henry Carp, prim and proper, about Macaulay, proper politician. What do you think he was being fair? I mean, because he just went through, he mentioned this Eleko thing that happened in previous council.
Actually, Patrick Deleko was the chairman of the book launch of Pelewura 2 days ago.
Can we quickly
I think you mistook his input concerning Macaulay. He is actually full of admiration, and he felt that he was unfairly treated. For instance, the 2 jail terms that he served, one of them was because something called the gunpowder plot. During the time after the people of Lagos had won a famous legal battle against the government, and the government they were on the way, they had Macaulay's paper went abroad with the news that there was a plot between some people in Lagos who didn't like the Eleko and the government officials, that they would blow up his motorcade when it came. It was called the gunpowder plot, and of course it was false. But Macaulay was not very fastidious about. If he felt he was serving the purpose of Lagosians. So for that, he was carpeted in this place, okay? The second one was over something that was obviously where it was up to. Some government officials said that he wasn't being fair to the beneficiaries of the will. The beneficiaries of the will themselves didn't complain at all. So that. I do not believe that PDC, who was there, who was the chairman, I do not believe I think he has some kind of faint admiration stroke revulsion, because Macaulay was a very complex. The description of a Jongboro means that he reveled in not being straightforward. He was the son of a clergyman who was also a Babalawo. So he liked being complex. He liked the idea of not being straightforward. He liked being called a Jongboro. A Jongboro is not a nice person, but he's somebody that you've got to respect and take note of.
So, on that note, we want to thank you so much, Dr. Olubile. So much, man. So, you see why you need to be here now. He was doing Yanga, saying, what are you people asking me to come and do, I mean, I say, oh, psychiatrist. He doesn't know that as a writer, you need to cut your audience immediately. Anyway, thank you so much for this contribution. Thank you so much. And we hope that we will have a bigger session, maybe later on, when they do. Tony, are you going to do a book and German?
Yeah. Well, the copies of the
book trek.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
In the next iteration. Yes.
Okay.
This is 10,000 is hardcover, and this is the soft cover at 5,000.
So,
okay.
Dr. Olubile, once again, thank you.
Amanda, come for your autograph.
I want for you. Oh, okay. So you drag me. I have to go back to my party. I was at the party. My wife is there.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry I have to be disruptive. We brought authors to read here. We brought authors to read, and they have their children online who want to join. So when I come here to say I want to, I have to. Please. No, it's Tony.
Thank you. Yeah. The next session is at the food court. Thank you.
Please, we're going to have reading immediately after this. Just take note of who is taking. Write the name. That's 10,000. Be writing the name. That's 10,000. No, yes, you get it. Please, the book trek starts immediately after this. We haven't taken more time now. I've taken it out. No, the reading project. We have authors. Yes. So she will take the names. She will take the names and then she will. Yes. She will get the account number. She will not collect your name. Collect his name. Please, in 2 minutes, I'm going to start the book trek because we are ready. We have 2 authors in the house. Bayo Lowak. In any case, so we're starting the book track right away. We're starting the book track right away.
I didn't want this list to overwhelm everything else.
Amara. Amara! You was said just now. Okay, the book track is starting now. Sir. So Amara, you're taking over now. I'll make it quick. Amara, come and take this mic from me, please. I think I'll take over this session myself. The coordinator is not ready. Bayoluwake, please. No, you're not ready. Please. Bayoluwake. I plan a project, then you now come and be telling me. Pastor Wale Adeduro, please. Pastor Adeduro, please.
One of those students, I'm coming down now.
Right about now, it's time for the book trek. Please.
Are you ready? Morning, I can't be waiting for you. People are online waiting for me.
Good evening, everyone. Can we please settle down? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's book trek session. I'm seated between two authors. I already announced yesterday that we're going to be discussing two books. On my right is Mr. Wale Adeduro. He's the author of Obalende, A Nation in Motion. And to my left is Mr. Adebayo Olowake, author of Time and Chance. We're going to be reviewing and discussing their books this evening. Before we go further, I'd like to read the synopsis of the books, and then the authors will tell us about themselves, and then we'll move into the conversation. Time and Chance. Patience Aza, flamboyant young female business mogul, upstages Mr. Ojomo, doyen of the fistic business in Nigeria, but she will have to win over an often heralded but seemingly invisible South African Caesar if her investments in a once-in-a-lifetime boxing deal must yield the anticipated returns. Continental and global boxing federations hang on to cash in on the outcome. Bankers gloat over incredible returns. Global TV audiences lustfully await the fight, while traditional media titles feast on the crumbs of what could turn out to be the biggest payday of their most extreme imagination. Leonga Damisa, Nigeria's engineering graduate boxer and an electrifying light heavyweight, hopefully goes up against South Africa's Oscar Malan, the African champion, a traditional pound-for-pound pugilist who has a reputation for taking no prisoners. If all goes well, the impending showdown looked set to surpass the 1974 Rumble in the Jungle. And then for Obalende, woven in simple yet ornamental literary expressions, the book reminisces about life on the island of Lagos in the 80s and the experience of the main character as and growing adolescents. The events captured in the book document the gradual breakdown of societal values, which are later raised as social norms and values that lead to failure of leadership, collapse of constitutional democracy, poor parenting, dysfunctional families, and corruption identified as major cogs in the wheel of national development. There's a trend that ties both books together, and that's that both books are faction. By faction, we mean that it's actually fiction, but then there's a lot of reality around it. So we're going to come to you. Yes, please tell us about yourself.
My name is Bayoluake, of course, and I was born in Lagos. I grew up in Lagos, and all of my education was in Lagos except my education, which I had at Ibadan. I worked as a journalist, and then worked briefly in the private sector, and then I was working with a humanitarian organization in conflict areas for about 20 years. But I've always written, I've always seized every opportunity I had to write, especially whenever I was privileged or chanced to do so. I think in summary, that's who I am.
Sir, you.
My name is Wale Adeduro. I was born and bred in Obalende. So the story that I have written, though not particularly about Obalende, but Obalende is the community that we are situated around us. Everything in that book happened in Nigeria, but Obalende was the basis, because at the time that Obalende was becoming real Obalende, it was just the next door to the seat of military power in Dodan Barracks. So I was able to write through those things. But in terms of who I have been, I schooled around Obalende, and I've done so many things. But over the years, I've been a banker, I've been an arts manager to the point of managing Muson Center at some point. I also have been a management consultant, and I'm currently a productivity consultant, and I'm also a son of God. I'm a pastor.
Please put your hands together. Okay, so now that we have established that you're both very busy people with a rather, with very tight programs, I'd like for you to tell us about your writing journey. What was it like? Was it easy? How long did it take you to write? And just share your writing experience with us.
Well, you can write. It depends on what exactly you want to achieve. For me, I started writing from when I was very young. But when I say writing, it didn't mean I wrote books. I would write, say, poetry. Started actually writing poetry. And then I remember at a point I was trying to actually write a novel, but I could only write 10 pages or 9 pages. And I kept wondering how authors were able to write a 200-page book. You know, I really couldn't figure that out. I think things are pretty much better now. At the time, I really didn't know how to go about it. But of course, I read a lot. You know, this was a period when there were all kinds of books. I mean, you had the African Writer Series, which were very, very synonymous with our environment. And then you had those books from outside of our environment, like the James Hadley Chase, like the Nick Carter, like Lobsang Grandpa, you know. So we read all of those things. And I think slowly the talent began to mature. So the challenge then was, now that able to write, how do you get it published? You know, and that was a very big, even though we had a lot of publishers in Nigeria at that time, but many of them were into educational publishing, you know, and the focus was educational publishing. And you find that, for instance, the African Writers series also was linked to education, because most of those, the genre, the themes were related to education. So for me, those were the challenges. But of course, at some point, one was able to surmount that.
Thank you very much, sir. Pastor Wale, please tell us about your writing journey. What was it like writing about?
My writing journey started from when I was a young child in primary school. I had a father, he died some months ago, who insisted those days that we had to read Daily Times. So every evening before we went to bed, he will give you a copy of Daily Times to read. And so he compelled us to read. Then my father, even in primary school, you were expected to do a summary of your week, how my last week went. And when you write, my father will sit down, correct you, and before you go to bed every weekend and all. So I started writing at that level. Second school, I joined Writers Club, Press Club. I joined Press Club, and I started writing. But I gained confidence in writing, I think, in 1985, when Guardian newspapers published my first article. I think then I wrote an article that was a satire, something about thoughts about unknowns, thoughts about the unknown. At that point, it was always common to hear about unknown soldier. So I did a satire on the unknown soldier. For me, I was just having fun. And somebody said, send it to Guardian, it will be published. And before I knew it, it was published, and that excited me. So from that moment on, I started writing for various newspapers. Now, in terms of creative writing, I will say I also started writing poems, scripts since I was in university, because as an undergraduate in the university, first I started university as a student of English studies, but I had to change university because of the fact that that university was a state university. I crossed to UI to study political science, but my heart had always been in theater, because I first gained admission to study dramatic arts in Ife, but my father refused for me to go. It was about 4 years earlier. But the first day I entered UI, I went straight to theater arts, and I went to first do I think that was this theater workshop. So from that moment, I started writing. Then I also spent some time auditing literature class in the Faculty of English, the Department of English, the Faculty of Arts. Then at some point, my mentor in writing, Professor Nishundari, actually sat me down to teach me how to read multiple books at the same time. But that was the first thing. He taught me how to read about 4 books at the same time. And he told me, you don't have to read only literature or novels. You must read diverse books. So he taught me all that. Then, of course, he taught me how to do 1 or 2 things together. So I started writing. This is not my first creative book that I'm publishing. It was a child of circumstance. I think German became, the arts editor or the editor of The Guardian, and he needed, he likes cheap labor. So, so German called me and said, Wale, you got to do this for me. I said, what am I going to do? He said, no, you must. Publisher here, Toyi Akinso had been doing Artsville. So he said, no, I don't want you to do anything about article now. You must do something creative. So I thought through it. I didn't know really what to write, but at that time I was, I think I was the general manager. I was a marketing manager initially in Muson Center, and we were hosting a lot of these politicians. Yes, after Zenith Bank, so we were hosting a lot of politicians who were preparing for the Third Republic. The Ekwemez and Co, the Nadeko guys, were always coming to hold meetings and all that. And one of those days, I saw them arguing over and over. This is what happened in 1967, 1968. That's how. I looked at it and said, well, this is the thing my father told me those days, really. All this crisis. These people are already jostling for this thing. So from that one, I just had inspiration. I'm going to write about politics. And again, we are preparing for the next republic, quote and unquote. So I said, okay, I'm going to do a build-up. So I started writing a series in the Guardian, which is the core of this book. And how did we come about Obalende? Very simple. I was born and bred there, and I understood the politics of Nigeria from Obalende. You know, but again, I needed to create a character. I needed to tell a story that's going to be almost forever. So that's how we created Afyon and all that. But now it has taken more than 2 decades to publish this book. Now, why did I not publish? The fear that Toyin will destroy the book with his mouth. The fear that even got German, they will read and say, you are not a writer, because I don't see myself as an author or a writer. So I always just kept saying, one day I will publish. But when German was 60, I congratulated him that morning. He said, the only gift I want is for you to publish Obalende. And I said, okay. So if this has been your heart, every time you keep talking about, but now you are trying to do something, I'm going to publish this. So I had to now sit down to go through it again, and then bring it up to date. But it's still a story about Nigerian politics and how it affected young Nigerians, especially young people, girls, because the character, if you're going to get to see the book, unfortunately was born and bred in a one-room apartment. Innocent girl, she had condemned all the loose girls on the street, all the 1,004 girls who were going about with politicians in 1,004 those days, you know, and all that. But unfortunately, one brother wrote in the house, in the compound, during one of those New Year celebrations around Obalende. You know, everybody had a lot of celebration. The brother had carnal knowledge of her. She became pregnant and ended up with HIV/AIDS. But she was a nice girl, but so that's how the journey has been.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. So we're going to read excerpts from the book shortly, but before that, your book is about a boxing bet, right?
It's about a boxer. Yeah, it's about a boxer. It's the book is about a young Nigerian who was exceptionally brilliant. He was actually he studied petroleum engineering, but while he was in the university, he represented his institution at the National University Games as a boxer. And his coaches always told him that he could be a professional boxer, you know, even though he studied engineering. So when he graduated, he decided he was not going to join an oil company. The opportunity was there, but he was going to become a professional boxer. And everybody said he must be crazy. You know, I mean, a lot of people will give, if you ask them to bring their parents' head, for them to get a job with an oil company, they would do that. Why would you want to go and be, you know? But he said, this is what I'm going to be, and I'm going to show that there's nothing wrong, you know, in putting your talent to use. So the book is about his adventures, but it is also about the power of the female person, the girl child, because the promoter who now showed an interest in him and promoted him all the way to the African title was a woman. And that's Patience Azar in the book. And not just that, Patience had to upstage the dominant boxing promoter in Nigeria, Mr. Ojomo. That was another battle on its own. And the media and everybody never gave Patience a chance because she knew nothing about boxing. You know, she just happened to have met Leonga, which is the name of the character, posting on TV, talking, and everybody, you know, he could bring people to watch him. He had the talent, and he could also talk. So, and she was like, well, let me give it a try. So it's about his adventures, the role of this female boxing promoter in getting him all the way to the African title, and all the intrigues in boxing. You know, I don't want to go, for those who probably don't follow, you have all the boxing federations, you have all the politics that comes into rating
matter. I saw something on social media. Somebody said, oh, they said 20 years ago, and my mind went to the 80s, but that was 2003. so your book is set in about 40, you know, it's about 4 decades. Why is it relevant? I don't know who wants to go first.
Okay, first, history is always relevant because history is talking about high story. If you don't know the story of where you came from or how you got here, you will be lost in the future because there are always questions that human beings ask. Americans today are trying to trace their roots to Africa. That is history. These are people who are in the new generation, but they want to identify themselves with the roots of wherever they came from. So to that extent, history is relevant, true and true. But again, this history is not particularly dated because we had an election early this year. We had underage voting. In this book, the narrator of the story, Afyong, was a young girl of about 13 when she was led with other young people to go and vote for election. And the voting was such that they said to them, when you get there, you say, up Nigeria. And the other place you say, one for me, one for you. Now, it is in that story. So when the young boy gets there, say, up Nigeria, one for me, one for, it means you are part of the group. The young person votes and he gets 1 naira. Now, it's still relevant, it's happening. So it's not new because a lot of people are going to say, oh, Nigeria is now bad and these politicians are bad. The truth is that if you read the history, you know how these things have been happening. For example, I just explained that the politicians brought, you may have heard about Okwashewo in Lagos. It happened during this season when politicians came in during the Second Republic. They were living in 1004, which is very close to Obalende. Now, at that point, taxi was about 1 naira per drop, quote and unquote. Now, from Obalende to Morocco, it was 1 naira. But from Obalende to 1004, which was before Morocco. Morocco, by the way, is where you now have a mobile building around that axis, around ShopRite axis and all that. Now, from Obalende at that time to Morocco was 1 naira. Now, from Obalende to 1004, which is the current 1004, where the politicians live, it was 5 naira. So when you stood out there looking for Morocco, they won't pick you because you are going to pay 1 naira. But the girl just says 1004. The taxi driver stops. He picks you, 5 naira. Now, the anger was what made people to now start abusing taxi drivers or Pashewo, that you are the husband of, you prefer harlots, you prefer prostitutes. Now, that's a small story, but it tells you how inflation comes. Perversion also creates inflation. Look at the Forex that we're talking about. Some people got Forex free. They don't even pay for it. In a manner of speaking. They get it in the morning, they sell in the afternoon, they make their own difference, and they sell at whatever. And that's how we got to this point. So all these things are in that story to tell you that this has come over the years. The issues of coup. Some people are saying the other time, they say, oh, if this doesn't happen in Nigeria's election, there's going to be coup. If you read Obalende, you will see what people who lived around Obalende went through during coup seasons. This is not a story about what happens in Nigeria. These are people who experience bullets flying around their head. These are people who lost their loved ones in the neighborhood because Dimka was in a shootout. Dimka's team or, and all that. So it's very relevant to the Gen Zs because the Gen Zs also need to understand certain things. If you are focused on the future and you don't know where you're coming from, you're going to sink, you're going to drown. And that's part of the challenge. For example, the Gen Zs all over the world today are sagging. The boys, they are sagging. Now, it's because you don't know the history of sagging. This is an American culture. This is a prison culture. It is those who came back from prison because they've been there for many years who had no belt. So you wore trousers and you couldn't use belt, so they had to sag and all that. So when they came out, they sagged. Now, decent people are sagging. So again, that is the value of history. So, and that's why I have not written as an historian. This is the authentic story of a young girl who was saying, again, it is very important. There are some people who are saying, and some of these young people, we profile people. You see a young man who has dreadlocks, you say this is a bad boy. So the one who is not wearing dreadlock is a good boy. The girl who is all over the place is a bad girl. This quiet girl is a good girl. But Afyon condemned all the young girls around that they were all harlots. But she was the one who became pregnant. She was the one who had HIV/AIDS. So again, so it's very relevant. And again, the language is relevant. Obalende is still there. And the beauty about it is that people only know that Obalende is a bus stop. That's what a lot of people assume. A lot of people don't know that Oshodi is a community. They think it's just a bus stop. They think it's a terminus. So if you read a book like this, you get to even know this story around Obalende. Some people say, I'm a Lagos Island guy, I'm a Highland guy. If you read a book like Obalende, you will see all the things. And when you talk about social life of Lagos, Obalende was an excellent center of social activity. So it's still there, though it's now rough, but it's still there. That's what I'm saying. No, I know it's not as been like this. It used to be slightly better. I mean, it was better than this. It was always fun, less violence. Then the other thing that the Gen Zs need to know, which I think they are doing well now, really, is that Obalende was one community where cultural harmony was at its best. It was only occasionally, because, I mean, this is Afyon narrating story about herself in Obalende. But you will see where Adamu gave his rams every year to Bero, a Yoruba boy, to go and graze. Then, of course, we went to White Sand, where they bring on White Sand around Toya Street, around St. Gregory's College, whatever, where they went to they do ram fighting and all that. Now, those things are still relevant because all over the world there's bullfight, there's whatever. So that's why I think it's still relevant. And the language is contemporary.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, sir, please tell us.
Well, mine isn't actually historical, but it does. I think it will appeal to the Gen Zs as well, because boxing is all about showmanship, but that's the glitz that you see. Behind the glitz is a lot of planning, there's a lot of organization, and there's what I would call strategizing as well. For instance, if you manage a boxer, you don't just allow your boxer to fight certain boxers who can end the career of that boxer in no time. You have to learn how to navigate through to ensure that your boxer, the manager has to make sure that you know who to fight and when. That teaches us strategizing, planning. At the same time, there's a lot of, I hope I'll have the opportunity to read a portion. It's about business, okay? And if you do not, I know today Gen Zs want to excel in whatever the endeavor that they are involved in, including those who would like to be business people. This book tells you something about business, and particularly tells you that boxing is big business, you know? So I feel that it would appeal, and there are contemporary figures. There are linkages with Anthony Joshua. Everybody here knows Anthony Joshua. You know, he's bout with Vladimir Klitschko. So there are all those linkages as well, which makes the book contemporaneous, if my grammar is correct, and therefore relevant for Gen Zs.
Thank you very much, sir. Before you get to reading, I think it's quite profound that you are men and then you've written books and put women as your lead character. That just struck me. So I don't know who wants to read first. We're going to take excerpts from the books. Yeah, please.
Okay, you want to read?
No, you read.
So I read first, okay. So what do I read? The business part or? Okay, because the book is about boxing. The most exciting part. Okay, let me read the business part. I'll just read the business part so that I try to keep your attention. 25, yeah, so let me do that quickly. They were all in the boardroom of In-Flight Promotions on Awolowo Road, Ikoyi, Lagos. Patience sat at the head of the table, flanked by Anthony, her accountant, to the left, while Abba, her business promotions manager, sat to her right. Harun, representing her public relations consultants, sat next to Abba, while Aminat, her banker, sat next to Anthony. She came along with Ogene Karo, the customer relations officer responsible for in-flight accounts in her bank. So where are we as at now? Patience asked, looking in the direction of Anthony. They had been at the meeting for the past 3 hours. The table was littered with files and various documents, but Aminat only carried a tablet, while Patience had a laptop and a large file in front of her. It was 4 days to the fight, and they had been meeting like this every day for at least 6 hours for the past 7 days. But Aminat only joined them physically today. She had previously been doing so via Skype. Anthony sat forward in his chair. Oscar Malan and Leonga Damisa have been paid up to the tune of 65% of their purse. Oscar's was wired to his account at Stanbic, while Leonga's was paid into his Sterling bank account. All taxes to the Lagos State government calculated against the total estimated ticket sales have been paid, and we got a letter of commendation from the Lagos State Inland Revenue Service. The total rental cost for the exposition hall of the Atlantic Paradise Hotel has been paid, but the problem we have with them regarding the total number of available seats remains. Abba will address that since she's the one handling the matter. On my part, the revenue projections are still far from my expectation. So I'll read now what Abba has to say, because there was a problem with this fight. Abba opened the file in front of her, but did not look into it. Atlantic Paradise Hotel has apologized for the error in billing us for 5,000 seats, when in fact, all the exposition hall can hold is just 3,000. The mistake came because the contractor finalizing the hall had promised to deliver a 5,000 facility capacity based on the architectural design. However, the planning authorities refused to approve 5,000 seats, although they had initially given an approval in principle for that capacity. Seriously, Aminat was speaking for the very first time. This is supposed to be a required by some of the equipment and the specific location of the cameras and camera drones to be used. Anyway, I insisted on seeing the managing director, and he eventually arrived at 1:45 a.m. So that's just one part, gives you an idea of the business side of boxing and the challenges that come with that.
Thank you very much, sir.
Before we go back to now, you did mention Anthony Joshua. I know that you're talking about characters like that Don something.
Don King.
Don King. But we don't know that these kind of elements are in the Nigerian boxing scene. So do you have to set your main theater of operations internationally, or are these things taking place at the National Stadium and these decrepit places, unlike the kind of places where the Anthony Joshua
they would fight?
I mean that's the question.
Okay.
Right.
No, the Nigerian boxing scene actually has some of these characters. What I didn't say was that I did boxing in secondary school, but I was not a good boxer. This book is actually inspired by some of my colleagues who were better boxers. But we have this kind of people within the Nigerian boxing scene, and they existed. They may not have operated at the grandeur level of the Don Kings, but you see, all the intricacies of the local boxing circuit are similar, because you have to, like I said, program your boxers. They have to scheme them properly. You have to make money from the bouts as well, and so on and so forth. The only thing here is I was also showing through the book that you can actually stage, and that's maybe for me the highest point of this book. You can actually host very successful boxing tournaments in Nigeria as well. And you just have to find the right business model. That's why they went to a hotel and not to the National Stadium. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So please put your hands together for him. Okay. Pastor Wale, it's your turn to read.
Let me read Cap of Babel. Cap of Babel, chapter 41 of Obalende, A Nation in Motion. Anger welled inside me. I hated the government of Nigeria at the time. I wished I had nothing to do with Nigeria. Each time I watched black and white television, I felt revulsion. Members of the ruling party, the National Party of Nigeria, did not appear to be worried about the state of affairs in Nigeria. The poverty in my family mirrored the deprivation in the larger society. My resentment was heightened by the arrogance displayed by the Shehu Shagari-led government. The government seemed to have lost various sensory organs essential to living. Each time the president appeared on our television, his uncreatively long cap passed a message to me. In its full length, the cap, like the Tower of Babel, suggested vanity. In my innocence, I began to perceive the owner as unserious. Being a girl who had not donned a cap like that before, I wondered if its weight on the head would not hinder the thoughts of our president. I remember that someone in our neighborhood cautioned me that nobody was allowed to abuse the president in America. My reaction to that caution was swift. I consider such a statement irrelevant to Nigeria. After all, American presidents do not wear the cap of Babel. Besides, the longish cap with all its embroidery contrasted sharply with the policy announced by President Shehu Shagari. In 1918 or thereabout, our economic teacher said that the National Party of Nigeria government, headed by President Shehu Shagari, had declared an austerity measure. According to our teacher, the new policy favored frugality in the private and public lives of Nigerians. It was a kind of belt-tightening program meant to reduce economic waste. I, however, felt that 2 or more caps could have been made from the material used for the president's cap. Though he was lean, everything about him spoke of opulence. His gold wristwatch and impeccable white shoes did not portray a man leading a campaign against waste. Compared to the poverty etched on the wall of our room, the air around President Shagari was far from austere. My mind whispered that the austerity measure was a declaration of where the politicians of the Third Republic, National Party of Nigeria, wanted Nigeria to be at the end of their stay in power. Poverty filled everywhere. At some point, it felt like poverty was becoming the directing principle of government. Nobody seemed to be spared in Obalende, except the man called Shagari's tailor. Of course, the 1,004 girls had their share of the largesse from the government. Their consulting politicians, sugar daddies, ensured that they did not lack the goodies. Their newly found opulence became the source of our pestilence. Taxi fares were hiked in Obalende. The smart taxi cab operators hiked fares from Obalende to 1,004 because of the girls who patronized the abode of legislators. The various food vendors also took advantage of the situation. Once a 1,004 girl approached their stand, other mortals were treated shabbily. These girls would buy a bowl of food containing more pieces of meat than the grains of rice. Some of these girls, whose parents and siblings like mine were crammed in a room apartment, were known to have embarked on weekend trips to Europe. These trips were frivolous and wasteful. Hard-earned money was frittered on extramarital dalliance. Coupled with the pain of mass poverty was the clear insensitivity of the politicians in power. One of them was reported as saying, in response to an allegation that Nigerians were wallowing in abject poverty, that no Nigerian was eating from the dustbin. Doing good to the highest possible number of people was not a principle of governance under Alhaji Shehu Shagari. Those privileged to be in government preferred to dole out favor like akara, being cake balls to a set of urchins. The extent to which people in Obalende went out to curry favor from those in government was absurd. An elderly man had no shame in approaching a 1,004 girl to connect him with a legislator to whom she was a mistress. It did not matter that the girl was young enough to be his granddaughter. So many efforts were made in Obalende to become friends with Adamu, the tailor. Since Adamu was believed to sew most of Shagari's Babariga Agbada dresses, people tried to use him as a bridge to get to the civilian president. The story of Babade, the Baba in Nigeria Street, was also funny. Somehow, a rumor broke out that this mature Baba was the official Baba of the president. This increased his popularity in Obalende. Babade's small shop near the Kefi end of Nigeria Street was always filled with people. Some would genuinely be there to barb their hair, while others simply waited to monitor Babade. The latter desired to be linked with the president. It was also rumored that to be willing to be part of everything in Obalende and in Nigeria, you needed to learn how to smoke sticks of cigarettes and eat kola nuts like President Shehu Shagari.
Really interesting pieces there. Thank you very much, sirs. I want to ask the audience, does anyone have questions? Any questions, please? Okay. He's next.
Good day. Please, can I see the title of your book again, Obalende?
Obalende, a nation in motion.
Is that, what word is that now? What word is Obalende?
Obalende is a place in Lagos.
No. What word Obalende is what word now? There's a place I'm going.
What do you mean? What word?
It's a Yoruba word.
Yes.
There's something that the moderator of the last, the book, Pelewura, were you here when he was talking about it? He said Pelewura, not Pelewura, he said Pelewura, Mimido. Mimido. He described it like that. That word does not look Yoruba to me. It looks English. It has no intonation. Okay. And there's a place I'm going. And you are doing history. I'll take you back history, two administrations. Itesiwaju Ekolo Jewaloju. Have you seen that thing?
Yes.
When they write, especially the one at Marina where that ferry is.
Yes.
The one before it was Eko Nibaje.
Yes.
When you see the difference between the two, there's intonation on Eko Nibaje.
Yes.
Itesiwaju has nothing. That thing, I don't know if it's English, if it's Yoruba, if it's Pidgin. That Obalende, I don't know if it's Yoruba, if it's English.
Okay, I get you, but because it's not, we didn't put tonal marks.
Yes, now it's detail now. A Mexican word, jalapeno. They put that detail. Spanish put that detail. French put that detail. Italians put that detail. They don't mix their words.
All right.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Next question, please. Okay, or comment.
All right, I'm not sure but I could relate with the piece you just read. Absolutely, because short of just saying the food vendor is Iyamodi, and if you grew up...
There is a chapter of Iyamodi now, yeah?
You see that I'm correct
There is
now.
a chapter on Iyamodi, not right.
Absolutely describes Iyamodi.
No, there's a chapter on Iyamodi, not right. Completely.
Yeah, because I grew up in Victoria Island, so Obalende was a place that we used to go frequently.
You are one of those oppressing us.
No, of course. You know, the thing about Obalende food is that no matter what they serve you at home, until you ate Obalende rice, you had not eaten. Yes. And when I was leaving home, my mom would say, "You are going to Obalende." I said, "Yes." He said, "Buy me ratemi, but that is buy my own portion." Iyamodi was legendary, you know, about Obalende, and you used to see all kind of cockery. I'm not talking of cheap cockery, big in CVU cars and FGN cars coming to buy stuff there, so I could relate with that. The other thing is on the boxing, I was just sharing with Tony that boxing, if you know what DSTV is doing with, I can't remember the name of the company, but it's owned by Jenkins Almona. They are promoting boxing right now across Nigeria, and they might not be paying them exactly what it is, but there's some sort of structure that MultiChoice has brought to the sport of boxing. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, sir. So does anyone else, is there any more comments, questions?
Yes, sir.
Because now, fast forward to 2023, are the 1,004 girls, are they now the Lekki Phase 1 girls? And do you think that the problem has ballooned?
That the problem has what?
Has ballooned.
Yes, it has ballooned. That's why ab initio, this was a nation in motion. Nothing, at the time I was writing, I was trying to say, hey, nothing has changed up to this point. And because I experienced what the politicians were jostling to do, I was projecting that nothing was going to change. And nothing has changed ever since. Nothing. Rather, we have now had Lekki girls, we've had Abuja babes, and also the worry ones.
So we're just
Aristos and all that. Yeah, so it's the same thing. So it's just the problem. I mean, I just talked about the underage voting. It's still on. Yeah. Underage, I mean, also all these things are still there. And I have visited Obalende in recent times. The pain that we experienced then is multiple now. Because where we used to be 6 people or 7 people in one room, some people are about 14 in one room now. I mean, the sanitation was okay then, even when you had pit latrines or the bucket guys, the night soil men, the agbipos, quote and unquote. But today, they are not there, but it's even more filthy than it used to be.
Wow.
That's why it's a nation in motion. Yes. Yes. Maybe for security and all that.
Wow. Wow. Thank you very much, sirs. Before we wrap this session up, I'd like to ask, where can we get this? Where is it available? How can we get this book? Because I'm sure that a lot of people are interested, are already piked, and would love to lay our hands on copies and read.
Well, Time and Chance is available on Seller and Okada books. Those are online versions, e-versions, and then it's also available on Amazon.com. And as time goes on, it will be available in more bookshops.
Thank you very much, sir.
There's a certain Ojomo character who, and I knew one who also happened to be sort of like the main marketing manager or something for Sonny Ade. Is this, because this character is also playing that sort of role in your. Did you know about that person?
No, not exactly. What I built this character around is that in virtually every country, you have one dominant character in boxing. You always have one very dominant. You have several boxing promoters, but you always have one dominant character. In the recent past, Nigeria had somebody called Martin Osaile. I don't know if people can remember him. And he also has his hair like Don King, yeah. So Martin Osaile was like the Nigerian Don King of boxing, But if you research, you'll find that every country has one dominant boxing guy that everybody goes to. And in this book, the heavyweight fight, light heavyweight title fight between Leonga Damisa and Oscar Malan actually didn't go ahead until a South African guy gave an unofficial approval. And this South African guy called Mr. Duncan, nobody knows what he looks like. Nobody has ever seen him before. But the rumors were that if you wanted a big title fight in Africa and you had him on your side, everything was bound to go well. So I described a scene where patients had to send Mr. Ojomo to talk to Duncan in South Africa to back this fight. So you always have these lead characters, but it has nothing to do with Sonny Ade's Ojomo.
Okay, so we've heard that Time and Chance is available online. Since we also want young people to read them, so it's yeah.
About in this publisher, said it's a self-published publication.
Okay, sir. So where can we get Obalende?
Okay, you can get Obalende copies from the Cora office here now. You can get copies from here. And you can also get it on Amazon, you can get it on seller.co, you can get it on Okada Books online, and you can get hard copies from here at this time. But we are discussing with two organizations. We are discussing with one eatery to market it around Nigeria, and we're also discussing with another exclusive restaurant that has some outlets in some places in Nigeria. Now, those two eateries, we have something in common. I mean, they are, if you see them and you see this cover,
I hope they're not situated in Obalende.
We look alike, and so, and they have some relationship. Then, of course, we are discussing with two people, one in Europe and one in North America, to also do a global presentation and a global tour of the book. Okay. But of course, it's already around, and some people are coordinating from Europe, some are coordinating from America. Those ones, I don't have a problem because soft copy is easy for them. They are online copies because they just book and they deliver. But in Nigeria, you have to publish, and so we publish some editions, some copies, but we need to publish more copies in the next few days.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so what next? When should we expect another book from you?
Well, this is my, okay.
What?
Sir? Okay, what next? For me, the next one is interesting. It's another book, Stolen Bullion Van. And no, it has not, funny enough, it has nothing to do with Babylon. It has nothing to do with politics, actually. It's also still going to be situated, incidentally, around one of the places that I lived in. It's going to be situated around Ajah. I initially toyed of Ajah Strait. I spent about 20 years in Ajah in my adulthood. So, and also, I was a journalist, community journalist around there. So I'm creating a story around that place too. No. And the reason is simple. One thing that is clear, maybe I'm diverging it now. Your mind will go to Babylon, but the truth is that if there's anything that Ajah has been synonymous with until recent time, is stealing. And what were they stealing? Land grabbers. And we have had dominant figures playing around that environment. So that's the whatever. So that's going to be the next one.
Sir, what next? When should we expect another book?
I like that. This is my fourth novel, published novel. So I have 2 action-adventure thrillers, Thunder, Lightning, and Storm, and Combat Zulu, which I wrote under a pseudonym. So I think my next novel will have something in common with the climate. But it's going to be an action-adventure novel, but it is around the climate. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. It was nice. Thank you, Pastor Wale. It was nice having this.
We take a group photograph. And the next event, which is the award of the Ken Sarua Prize for book review, will happen downstairs. The federal honoree is here, has joined us. That's the Obari Gomba, who won the Nigerian Prize for Literature last September. All right. So, TOJ, take. Join us. Professor Gomba, join us on the, let's take this one.
Please come to the video. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So the Ken Sarua Prize for book review will happen downstairs.